president of the Mississauga Arts Council. The group whose mission is to promote the arts and build a stronger community through the arts, and is finishing DBA on social capital, one of the chapters of which is how the art brings communities together, particularly diverse, multi-ethnic ones. In today's world, with terrorist attacks, people banning different bathing suits, and politicians talking about deportation and building walls, this is an extremely relevant topic for us. Support of and participation in the arts and cultures can and will build a stronger Mississauga. Brian is currently principal of Crombie Capital Partners, a merchant bank, and CFO of Steel Rail Entertainment, a group putting the Thomas the Tank Engine attraction in Niagara Falls. He has previous experience in the entertainment, arts business, working for the Walt Disney Company in strategic planning and corporate development, keg restaurants, and the Pattison Group, Ripley Entertainment. He was also part of the team that negotiated the purchase and financing of the Ottawa Senators NHL Hockey team and the Corel Center arena. He started his career as a hotel restaurant consultant. He was founder and co-chair of the Mississauga Summit, which has tasked forces on building livable cities. I now welcome Brian Crombie, speaking on the arts, what the city celebrates define it.
Thank you all very much for coming today. It's a real privilege for me to be here and speaking to you once again. I have had the privilege of speaking to you before. I'm doing a doctorate in business, and one of the things that's fascinating in that is I've studied entrepreneurship and economic development, and come to the conclusion through that the social capital, which I'll describe a little bit, is the key to successful entrepreneurship, economic development, and building cities. And one of the things that's fascinated me is that one of the best ways you build social capital is through the arts. And so that's why I'm here today, and that's to tell you about how critically important arts and culture can be to building a better city. And I'm going to try to appeal to you to be supportive of that. And I think we've got some fantastic people, Mike Douglas and others from the Mississauga Arts Council, from Visual Arts Mississauga, from Heritage Mississauga. Lyndon is from Trillium, which funds a lot of the arts, Miss Universe pageant. Molly was Mississauga International Fashion Week, so we've got a lot of different people. Mark and Tanis over here are doing a big Ukrainian festival. Ian, where's Ian, is from Colors of Love, so we got a lot of different people doing things in the arts which are actually practicing what I'm going to preach today. Elizabeth, who's a concert pianist, and if you haven't heard her perform, you've missed an incredible opportunity. She played in my church for a fundraising event for my wife. Under the dome, it was spectacular the way the music spread through the sanctuary. So, you know, arts is something that brings people together. And if you remember nothing else I say for the next 20 minutes, please remember that. So I'm going to come over here and run through a couple of slides. And as I said, and I've spoken to you before about the power of co and community, and that I think is the key. So Flutra was kind enough to give you a little bit of an overview, but I've actually been in the business of the arts for a long time. I was a hotel restaurant consultant. I worked for the Walt Disney Company doing planning. I had some time in Paris at Euro Disney. I did, along with my wife, actually was also involved in Pleasure Island and bringing people together. So I've never been an artist. Actually, I was, I have to admit, the lead singer for a punk rock band in grade 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then my voice changed, exactly. But other than that, I've not been an artist myself. I've always been on the business sides of the arts and entertainment. And both at Molson's and then when I was working with the Senators, I was involved in negotiating contracts and getting financing for the arts. And so I've never had the privilege of being anything like Elizabeth and being a pianist, but I've always been on the business side and been able to see how critically important it is for people to enjoy each other's company in the arts. And then, as I mentioned, I did this DBA and started out thinking it was all going to be about money and the banker. That was going to be the key catalyst to economic development. I came to a conclusion at the end of it, and you've been subject to my speech before, some of you, that it wasn't about that, it was about community. So I've spoken to you about the Mississauga Summit, and the Mississauga Summit had a big section that John from Streetsville was involved in about building a livable city. It was a walkable city, a city where people could go to coffee shops and restaurants. And there was a lot of thinking, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that today, about building those types of cities where people want to interact. Billy Gordon and I are involved in some things in Wasaga Beach and Collingwood, which are also about that, building places where people want to get together and interact. And then I've spoken to you about the power of co, which is, you may remember, some of you that have been to that speech, about connections and conversations and collaboration and collisions. That happens in arts and culture more than anywhere else. I do want to come back, and your president invited me very kindly to come back and talk to you about transit at some point in time in the future if you're interested in being bored one more time by me, because I'm also part of the Transit Alliance, which is a group that are trying to spur transit development in the Greater Toronto Area. But once again, the principle is the same. It's connectivity. It's connections. And if you have those connections and those ease of connections, then you have a better, more vibrant city. But today I want to speak to you about the Mississauga Arts Council, because I'm the president of that Arts Council, and what the arts does. And I want to tell you about the connectivity and inclusivity in our community that comes from support of the arts. I want to specifically mention 2 events that are coming up in the future. And then I want to end, if I could, with 5 game changers for Mississauga. And I have to say now, I'm going to give you 4 points. I could do a whole speech on each one of these points. The first thing is that there's something special about cities. The metabolism of cities is more successful for innovation, for entrepreneurship, for patents, for culture, for almost everything. And it's something that really has come up over the course of the last 2 decades with a plethora of books that you probably heard about or read or heard speeches about, whether it's Walkable City or The Triumph of the City. But there's something about cities, and cities, some work and some don't work. And there's things like connectivity through transit and connectivity of people that end up being the keys. And if you've got cities that have different silos, they don't work. If the cities get rid of the silos and interact, they end up working and create those economic development. And the key, number 2 principle, is the key is social capital. And this is something that's really come out in the last 10 years, where people thought before there was human capital and financial capital and maybe physical capital that were keys to success. And a new principle that no, it's something different. It's called social capital. And people came to the realization that it exists, but then the question was, how do you create it? Which is this 3rd principle that I've spoken to you about, called the power of co, which is there are some places that are hot, some places that are in. And you know, you guys are running big events, and Molly, you ran that big event, and Leslie runs a whole bunch of events, as does Olivia. There are events that people say, this is the event you got to be at. And then there are other events you say, that was the most boring night, why was I there? And there's something about the interaction between people that ends up being the key. And I think you did a great job today with the introductions, because there were probably 10 or 20 people that were introduced today that I want to meet. And probably all of you had the similar reaction. There's something about the way that you interact that ends up being key. Alfred Marshall, an economist in 1920, said the true entrepreneurial successes have something in the air. He called it spirits of entrepreneurship in the air. Couldn't describe it. Here's a mathematician economist that says some cities have got something special and other cities don't. But we have some challenges and opportunities. And I think this is the key for why I'm so excited about the Mississauga Arts Council. First of all, and I'm going to show you some graphs on this, we've had a massive decline in social capital. So social capital is important, but it's declined dramatically. And that's an impact that we've got to deal with in our society. People don't join anywhere. They don't join Rotaries, they don't join churches, they don't join clubs, they don't join bowling leagues, etc. Second of all, and this is an interesting statistic, and I don't know, I think it's something like 56% of Mississauga has lived in Canada for less than 10 years. So we've got in Mississauga, and frankly it's a little bit stratified, it's different north of the 403 versus south of the 403, but we've got a whole bunch of people in Mississauga that are newcomers, not just to Mississauga, but to Canada. And so the question is, how do we get to know those people, and how do we get them to feel included? Taking back a look at history, and there's a whole bunch of academic research that has been done on this, is the most successful cities in the past have been port cities where people from different cultures, different races, different geographies have mixed. And they've traded back to their home countries, they've exchanged different menus, they've went to each other's restaurants, and they developed a better culture. The cities that weren't port cities, that ended up being all one race or one religion or one ethnic group, didn't end up being as successful. And you know the port cities that I'm talking about that have been so successful. Today, Richard Florida and others would say that the most successful cities, Silicon Valley, etc., are the creative cities. And the way that Richard Florida talked about it is you got to be a city that welcomes the most bohemians and gays. And he used that mainly as a joke, but it's the reality is, if you've got a city where people of different types of ethnicities, of religions, of sexual orientations feel comfortable in that city, you'll end up being that type of welcoming city that people want to live at, and they'll end up being creative. And then it's fascinating, through this research that I've done, and as Fluta mentioned, I've got a chapter in my thesis on this, the two things that end up being the ways that people interact with each other more than anything else is sports and arts and culture. So you think about, if they come to this city and they go to their own temple or their own mosque or their own church or their own synagogue, they don't mix. They stay in their own area, their own ethnic group. Mississauga, which is a wonderful organization and a great group, too often, frankly, people just stay in their own pavilions. Don't go visit everyone else. So there's something about arts and culture, sports. If you're an Italian and you play on the Italian soccer team against the Croats, against the Portuguese, you end up interacting. So there's something about sports and recreation and arts and culture that actually break down barriers and create bridges. And so in the end, the key, I think, is that we've got to build connectivity, bridges across culture, and make people feel included. So Robert Pattison wrote a book about 25 years ago called Bowling Alone in America. You probably heard about it. It's one of the most preeminent books in sociology. And what he argued is that we're no longer joiners. And this is a graph of the association in clubs, whether it be bowling leagues or Rotary or Kiwanis or all those different clubs that one wants to join. And we went from a low in the early 1900s to a high in the middle of the century, and we're coming back down low again. And it's fascinating, and I'm not gonna, I could do a whole speech on this. If you take a look at a bunch of different graphs, whether it's income inequality, wealth inequality, associational membership, philanthropy, cross-party collaboration, union membership, a whole bunch of different statistics have followed that same curve, where we were a me-oriented society in the Gatsby era of the 20s. We were a we-oriented society in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Some people thought it was because of World War II and the aftermath of World War II, but we were a we-oriented society. And we've now become, again, an I-oriented society. And it's interesting, those societies, those cities that are more I-oriented are less successful than those cities that are more we-oriented. So the question is, how do we change that? And this gentleman suggests that we're about at a fulcrum point where we're going to go the other way. But the question is, some people will go early and some people will go late. And those cities and communities, and one of the best examples is Silicon Valley, that's become we-oriented, ends up being more innovative, ends up being more successful. Two more books I'll tell you about. One that I thought was absolutely fascinating. Rise of Creative Class talked about, as I mentioned, gays and bohemians, welcoming society. If you're a society where everyone, and he's talked about when you want to implement cars, you want everyone that's gone to the same country club, probably the same race, the same ethnic, because you're implementing big cars. Detroit. But if things change, that's the worst way to be. And if you're going to be a group that have the ability to adapt, what you need is the gays and bohemians, the different people, the creative class. And then the Geography of Genius, a fascinating book, went back through history, the most successful cities, the most successful cultures. And they used Vienna. We had some visitors from Austria over recently. They used Vienna as the example. They said Vienna was the most successful when the Austrians and the Jews mixed. In a whole bunch of history, they didn't mix. And then for about 100 years, they mixed. That was where most of the people that we think about, the Austrian economists, Freud, etc., were at their zenith. They were big supporters of the arts at the same time. Some of the best operas, etc., came out of Austria during a certain 100-year time period. And then after that time period, the Jews and the Austrians didn't mix again. So there's something about this mixture of different races, of different people, that ends up being the key to success. And he goes back to Edinburgh, he goes back to China. When people mix, you end up having success. When they stuck in their silos, you don't end up having success. So one of the things that's fascinating that comes from all of this is that people have gone through, there's 3 stages of development of a strong, inclusive community. The first stage is you tolerate people. So people of different ethnicities have come to your city and you tolerate them. Maybe before that you don't tolerate them, but then you tolerate them. Then the second stage is you actually engage with them. And the third and most important stage is you celebrate their reality, existence, participation in your community. So the question I got to ask you is, where are we in Mississauga? Are we celebrating people of different races, different cultures, different religions in our community, or are we just tolerating them? And so therefore it comes down to the title of my speech. What a city celebrates ends up defining it. And I think that's the key. And if you celebrate ribs, which I think you do a great job of, I think you know, what was it, 100,000, where's Natalie? 100,000 people?
Yeah, $100,000 to charity.
Like, that's great, but, you know, is that what we really want to celebrate? I think you did a fantastic job, but I think we got to think about what we're celebrating. And then it's interesting, a comparable kind of sort of Maslow's theory of needs comes through saying, what are the 3 stages of people feeling included in their community? The first stage, very clearly, is they got to get a job. Second is they got to have a house. If you don't have a place to... I had a friend that was being homeless last week. You couldn't imagine what a person, their whole life has changed when all of a sudden they're going to be homeless. So clearly having a home ends up being key. And then language. If they don't have English language capability in Mississauga, they're not going to end up being as successful as they otherwise would. So clearly those basic things are key. Second, the second thing that's most important to feeling included is either getting involved in sports or getting involved in arts and culture. Because they transcend different ethnic groups. They transcend races. Music brings the globe together, people have said. Music is the soul of the human spirit. And the third is, then they run for politics. Or then they get involved in a Rotary club. Or then they get involved in the community. Then they feel included. But it's interesting. The people don't do this until they've done something else. So the guy that runs a sports league, or the Portuguese soccer club, or whatever, will a couple of years later say, yeah, I can actually run for politics and get involved in city council or parliament or whatever. But it's an interesting stage. And it's interesting. And I'm not being negative to religion. I go to church every Sunday. But religion ends up too often keeping people in their own ethnic group or their own racial group or their own whatever group. And it doesn't integrate. And so what we need to do is we need to think about how we support these things in sports and arts and culture that end up bringing people together. So that's the first third of my talk, and I hope I convinced you that arts and culture can bring people together. And so I joined the Mississauga Arts Council about 5 years ago. Last year I ran for and became president of the Arts Council, and I got to tell you, it's one of the most exciting things that I've been involved in. The mission of the Mississauga Arts Council is completely consistent with everything I've talked about, which is create, connect, and celebrate. Being the umbrella that brings people together. So let me tell you a little bit about some of these things. Obviously, create is the first stage of artistic talent. And it's fascinating that art is one of those things that ends up being ubiquitous in our culture. So you take a look at almost every culture. Lots of cultures have religion and mythology, but not every culture. Every culture has art at its base. And they have dance, they have song, they have design, they have more than just visual arts. They have it all. And it's fascinating to me because today we think about the arts as sort of a luxury good, something only the rich will enjoy. Dan Pangman is music, Canadian Music Week, which is people think is highfalutin and just the top of society would end up going to. But the fact that everyone is artistic and everyone is involved in the arts and every culture has been in the art, I think says that arts is that epitome of human existence. It's the truest record of our insights and feelings. Wherever a society has achieved great culture, arts was right there at the beginning. Think about Freud. Do you know that Freud was the biggest sponsor of opera in Vienna? So some of the most successful people in one sector of society have ended up being big sponsors of arts and culture in another sector of society. And arts, I think, is the spearhead of human development. So that's the whole idea of creativity. But then, for my interest, after creativity comes the second, which is the connections that are key. That people meet over the arts. They meet at a concert. When you go to church and you sing together, or when you're at a rock concert and everyone sings together, there's this feeling of unity that I don't think you can get in almost any other kind of existence. When we were all standing up singing O Canada, we felt more unified than any other time, I think, that we do. And so connection ends up being key. And there's some keys here. Because arts are the languages that everyone speaks. We were in France this summer. A lot of the music was English. And all those people that didn't speak English knew all the words to the songs. They knew the words in some of the movies. So arts is a language that everyone speaks. It cuts across cultural. Do you know what the number one genre of music is in China? It's classical music. It's Western classical music. And they know the famous symphonies incredibly well. They integrate the mind, body, and spirit. They provide opportunities for self-expression. They provide a connection between motivation and application. They provide independence if you want to be a solo pianist, or collaboration if you want to be part of a whole symphony. It's interesting, academic achievement. Kids that are in music programs do better academically. Some of the best scientists and physicists are musicians. You go through all the academic studies, arts ends up being key. And then the final stage, as I mentioned, you got to celebrate it. And whether we celebrate, hockey or the Olympics or entrepreneurship in a city or a country, that'll define it. So Waterloo has an entrepreneurship week. We have Canada Hockey Day. When you celebrate a certain thing, that's what's going to define what your city's all about or your country's all about. If you celebrate the arts, whether it's the Marty's, our annual awards ceremony, or multiculturalism through Mississauga, that's what's going to end up defining you. And then one final comment, if I could. Through all of this work that I've done studying social capital and clubs and organizations, there's an interesting theory, and I think I mentioned this to you last time I was here, but it's worth thinking about because it sort of somewhat applies to your four-way test, and someone yelled out, fun is the last one. It's fascinating. Successful groups are active, not passive, and this is groups, events, religions. This has ended up being applied in research to a whole bunch of different ways. It's for others, so it's giving, it's charitable. It's with others, it's got connectiveness, and it's fun. And it's interesting, they applied this to social organizations in the United States, and they found out, and I'm not sure what your knowledge is of some of the other groups, but they found out Kiwanis, or whatever it's called down there, I can't remember now, was too much about just the fun. So they had great, beer parties and what like that, but it wasn't enough about actually doing stuff for other people. They found out that Toastmasters, very successful group, people came and joined for a year or two and then left. The reason why it was too much about me, because I went there to learn how to speak at Toastmasters, but long term it wasn't about other people. So it's got to have all four of the components for it to be successful. Now, one of the fascinating things that came out of this is there's one thing you could test about a church or a synagogue or a temple more than anything else about whether they're going to be successful long term and have growing membership. Do you know what it is? If you ask people if they know people in their pew, if the answer is high, the church has got growing membership. If the answer is low, it's got declining membership. That one question, do you know the people in your pew? So people come to church, my wife goes to church for the Mass, I go to church for the sermon. So different people go for different reasons. But the reason why they stay and come back is because of the coffee hour. The reason why you get involved in Rotary is because you end up meeting interesting people and either socializing with them or doing business with them. Networking groups, the same thing. If you end up going to a networking group and you just get a bunch of business cards, you're not going to go back. But if you actually get to know people and like people, then you'll go back. And the fun. Too often these groups end up being all about work. And this is one of the biggest problems in business. It's fascinating. In business business meetings, you might do the first couple, but if you don't celebrate your victories because you've sold a big house or you have organized a big event, you'll end up not being successful. That celebration ends up being key. So, creativity, to give you two pitches on two events that are coming up that I would like you to consider participating in because I think celebrating the arts is critically important. The first one is a Colors of Love Gala on October 16th. Did I see Maggie come in? This is Maggie back here. Stand up, please, for a second, if you could. She founded a couple of years ago this fascinating organization. They had their first event in Brampton a couple of years ago where what she said is too often when we end up bringing international stars, it's the Polish star singing to Polish people, the Portuguese star singing to Portuguese people, and too often it's the folklore people in the church basement. We don't get to see the top talent from international. What we should do is we should have an event where the top talent from around the world comes here and we all get to share it and enjoy it together. So she's got an event October the 16th at Hammerson Hall. You see it here on the bottom right with 5 different performers from around the world that are all coming together so we can all enjoy it together. So it's multiculturalism, but it's different than the multiculturalism we see too often, which is, and I don't want to be critical of Mississauga. Mississauga, I think, is a wonderful organization. But, you go to the Portuguese pavilion, 80% of the people are Portuguese. You got to have those events where everyone gets together. And so I think this is a great event. And then, Mike Douglas, could you stand up, please? Mike Douglas is running an event with these people up here on October the 29th, correct?
Correct, yes,
Called
sir.
the Magic Masquerade Gala, which is going to be a big fundraiser for the Mississauga Arts Council. It's going to be at the Lake Shore Convention Center, and it's going to be the most fun event that you've had at a gala in at least the fall of 2016. So that's my pitch for 2 events coming up that will help you celebrate. We did Mac Arts Festival in Celebration Square. In Celebration Square, thank you to the members of the council, has been a huge success, and people come almost every weekend, thousands of them, as you well know from Ribfest. And the Martys, we ended up having the most successful Martys, 660 people in attendance this year. So what you celebrate ends up defining your city. And if you come out to these events, we'll end up collectively being more successful. So that's my pitch for 2 different businesses. I want to end with 5 game changers that are all connected to either arts or recreation for Mississauga. And once again, I reiterate that none of these would anyone else in my house necessarily agree with, but I just want to present them to you as my things of what would be game changers for Mississauga. And I present them to you because they connect with what I just talked about, which is making arts and culture key. They also connect with parks and recreation. And finally, what they do is, I think, is they create the types of environments where people will end up interacting and connecting. I don't think we do enough of that in Mississauga, and I want to challenge you. The final reason why is, if any of these things are going to end up ever being successful, it's going to be because people like you get involved in the civic process and say, why can't we do this? Politicians can't do it on their own. Presidents of Arts Council, boards of Arts Council can't do it on their own. They need the civic help to do that. So here are my 5 arts and culture, parks and recreation game changers for Mississauga. I'm going to run through really quickly. I could do a full presentation, as others could, on each one of them, but just to give you a sense. This is the Living Arts Center. It's got 2 big parcels on the northeast and northwest that have been left vacant for a long period of time. Michael Spaziani, an architect down in Port Credit, proposed that what we do is we build an art gallery, a hotel reception, and 2 big towers. This is what it would end up looking like. It would frame City Hall, and it would make downtown Mississauga a true center of arts and culture. He wants to have a huge ballroom. He wants to have a trade show. He wants to have an art gallery right there at street level across from Sheridan College. I think this would be a game changer for downtown Mississauga. This is just north of us here. From Dundas to Burnhamthorpe to the 403 to Eglinton is 500 acres of parkland that's all contiguous. It is bigger than the half of Central Park that people end up going to. Central Park is 800 acres, but the bottom 400, south of whatever that major mid-street is where all the activity happens. Think about Manhattan, and you can't think about Manhattan without thinking about Central Park. Think about Vancouver, and you can't think about Vancouver without thinking about Stanley Park. Think about London, and Hyde Park ends up being a critical thing in your image. Think about Mississauga, and you know what it says, and I hope no one is here from Riverwood. Visual Arts Don't Tell the Riverwood people is, you know what they've got on their front page that they brag about? It's the hidden jewel of Mississauga. Do you know what the hidden jewel means? No one knows about it! Why can't these acreages be planned together and be Mississauga Central Park? Why can't it have the same kind of impact on Mississauga that Central Park has? Why can't it be the place where you got to go? So there's been a lot of studies of Central Park and Stanley Park and Hyde Park and why it's been so successful. There's a couple things. Number one is you got to have connectiveness. You heard that word again? Connectiveness. You got to have sociability. People have got to meet. Have you ever been to Central Park? You know what's lining the pathways? Park benches so you can stare at the people going by. Because people want to be seen and see. top end of your golf course and Credit Valley Golf Course is. It's a huge opportunity to make a change in Mississauga. 1 Port Street. This is 6 acres of land, got a 225,000 square foot building in it. If you were in North Vancouver, Granville Island or Halifax, you would say to the condo proposers, no way you're going to build condos on this development. We want to have a retail festival marketplace. This is this building. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's 225,000 square feet. Inside of it, it's gorgeous. You know what it's used for now? To store boats and bird blank. That's what it's used for. And this proposal that's currently been proposed is going to look worse than Harbourfront. The people that live there will love it, but everyone else won't. We were down in Nice in the summer, walking down that Promenade de l'Angleterre, where the terrorist attack was. It is 24 feet wide. It's a sidewalk. No wonder people wanted to use it as a terrorist target, because it was the best place to be. It was spectacular. That's what we could have here. So Michael Spaziani, a great architect, right now is building this. Where? In Barrie, on Lake Simcoe, a beautiful retail marketplace. Why can't we have a retail marketplace that would be the farmer's market, that would be the artist's establishment, that would be a fantastic place to go to? And if you had an LRT stop right in front of it, it would be even more successful. And think about some of the comparables that you know of. Faneuil Hall, festival marketplaces throughout the United States. Granville Island Marketplace, that is one of the top places to go in Vancouver. You know what these buildings were? They were the same thing. They were built by the federal governments eons ago to take off goods. They became defunct because people were no longer shipping stuff by boat, and so people decided what they wanted to do it. Could you imagine Boston now? Who's been to Boston and seen Faneuil Hall? Would you prefer Faneuil Hall or 10 condo buildings? If you were just wanting to pay down debt, you'd prefer 10 condo buildings. And that's what that's our current objective. This could be the #1 attraction in Western Toronto. It's bigger than the St. Lawrence Centre. It's bigger than Granville Island Market. And if you haven't been in there, it's stunningly gorgeous. And there's been a lot of work done on how you build beautiful places. And you know, a lot of those concepts are very similar to what we talked about. It's about sociability, about being active, it's about being comfortable, and it's about having connectiveness, linkages. We can do this if we only get behind this. This is the OPG lands. 120 acres on the OPG lands, about 300 acres of warehouses just above that in Lakeview. Lakeview, the place that hasn't had a view of the lake since before World War II. This pier, I've walked out this pier. This pier is longer into the water than the CN Tower is tall. The view from that pier of Toronto, of Port Credit, of Oakville, of Hamilton, of Niagara-on-the-Lake is spectacular. This could and should be an incredible new front door to Mississauga. Some of the projections have it being 25,000 people. This is where the condos should be built, and a lot more, not crowded into 4 or 5 acres in 1 Port Street. And if you don't like this idea, this is my even better one. This is 75 acres of land at Mississauga Road and Lakeshore, the old Imperial Oil lands. Take a look at how big this piece of property is versus Tokyo, Copenhagen, Florence, Glasgow. The whole St. George campus of U of T could fit onto those 75 acres. This is an unbelievable jewel. My suggestion to you is build the condos and the development on either this site or Lakeview and turn 1 Port Street into a retail marketplace. And then my final one. We have a 200-acre vacant piece of property at Bristol Road in Huron, Ontario, right where an LRT is going to go past. And it's been sitting there doing nothing for eons. This guy used to run an agricultural winter fair, fall fair there. There's a sugar bush there. It's one of the only sugar bushes in the whole urban GTA area. There's a working farm in that area. The opportunities to develop this is something. And right now what the proposal is to build commercial and condos on the Huron, Ontario side, which may make sense just to fund the balance of it, but it's been sitting there doing nothing. And you can have an LRT stop. How many people of that 57% of Mississauga that's lived in Canada for less than 10 years have actually gone to the Markham Agricultural Fair, or the Royal Winter Fair, or to one of those agricultural fairs? They probably haven't, but if you had a fair there where they could go buy a pumpkin, they could go ride a midway, they could go pet in the petting zoo, it would be an incredible opportunity. And once again, think about the comparables and how important they've been in our life, whether it be Riverdale Farms or the Evergreen Brickworks. Evergreen Brickworks is the same size. down in a conservation area, the City of Toronto funded its complete redevelopment. Think about the Markham Fair and how beautiful the Markham Fair is. Think about Black Creek Pioneer Village. Why can't we do something like that on the Britannia Farms? So those are my 5 game changers for Mississauga. All have arts and culture or recreation as the key parts of them. Go to the McMichael Gallery. Kleinburg wouldn't exist the way it is today if it wasn't for the McMichael Gallery in the Convention Center and the conservation area. So if you like any of my ideas, number 1, come out to the Colors of Love Gala on October 16th or the Magic Masquerade Party on October 29th. If you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram at Brian H. Crombie or on Twitter at Brian Crombie, and those are my websites. And I'll leave you with those dates. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. That actually was wonderful. I have read Richard, Florida, and I think if you can bring those kinds of ideas and apply them to Mississauga, then definitely Silicon Valley and all the other stuff that makes it successful could potentially be ingredients for what might happen right here. So as a thank you gesture, we have a certificate here that says that we will immunize 45 children against polio in your name. Thank you very much. And last but not least, I'd like to thank the Mayor of Mississauga for taking time from her schedule to be here today. Thank you very much.